All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Amy and Nick here bringing a preview and prediction for Auburn versus Alabama. The Iron Bowl going down at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on CBS. Bama 21.5-point favorites. Over/under is 49. And this series has belonged to Bama the last 2 years. They lead 48-37-1. Looking at this Auburn offense, Nick, it's been a colossal failure, I'd say, this year. Coming into the season, I felt like Robbie Ashford should have been the quarterback. And he eventually got that job. TJ Finley's really battled some health. Zach Calzada, I'm not really a big fan of, but he was also injured to start the year. And, it's not been great for him. 49% completion rate, 6 touchdowns, 7 picks, 140 yards per game, 588 and 5 touchdowns. He's a heck of a runner, 53.5 yards per game running. But Ashford, his first year as a starter, has not been very good. And obviously, this has not been the perfect situation for him. Brian Harsin fired after, just a couple of games ago. The offensive line has been incredibly poor. Not much speed out wide. Javaris Johnson, he's probably their only notable receiver. 25 grabs, 473 yards. Coy Moore, he's respectable. 297 on 19 grabs. And then after that, Jarquez Hunter's the next leading receiver, who's the backup running back. This is just not a good Auburn offense one bit, Nick. The last 4 out of 5 games, they've had under 10 completed passes. And, to be fair, they don't attempt many passes either, only about 20 per game for Ashford. But this offense, just no identity, no urgency either. I mean, against LSU, they had 300-plus passing off some big plays. But other than that, for the most part this season, been incredibly. I think the Georgia game is a perfect example of that, where they, Ashford went 13 for 38, a 34% completion rate. And that one just overall horrible offense. What are your expectations for them here in this game? A game that they seem to play close in, especially last year. They probably should have won the contest. But if there's a game for this offense to all of a sudden turn up, even though they're playing a tough defense, it would make sense for it to happen here in a rivalry game.
This offense has been terrible for Auburn this season. They don't really have any identity at all. Back when the Gus Malzahn era, they had an offensive identity. They were always going to attack you in multiple different ways. Exciting, high-paced offense. They just did not exist under Brian Harsin. Now Cadillac Williams is trying to pick up the pieces and really is kind of struggling to do so, considering the tools he has. Tank Bigsby is a talented back, right? Nearly at 1,000 yards rushing this year. He's got 907 right now, plus the 10 scores for him. He's really their only offense. Tank Bigsby basically runs through him, considering Robbie Ashford just struggles. Yes, Robbie Ashford has made some good progress on the ground. Nearly 600 yards rushing this year, plus the 5 scores for Ashford. It's just his throwing the ball is just poor, right? 1,500 yards through the air, below 50% completion percentage, 6 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, been sacked 20 times. Offensive line is certainly not helping him. This offense just lacks the talent, and a lot of it does come down to the recruiting over the past few years with Brian Harsin. He really wasn't able to put together anything in his last 2 classes of note. He obviously gets the boot very quickly into his tenure, and now Auburn, is trying to figure out where they go from here. Johnson and Moore, they're respectable wide receivers. Even though Moore has below 300 receiving yards this season, he should eclipse that 300 mark come Saturday. In general, this offense has been an unmitigated disaster. They really can't do anything at all on any given Saturday. When you look at their numbers this year, yards passing 181, yards rushing 195, below 200 yards per game for each of those categories, 24.5 points per game and allowing 27.7 points per game. This Auburn team is terrible on offense, and I don't think there's any way they can kind of solve this in the short term for Saturday in a bowl game if they become bowl eligible. This is a tough break for this Auburn offense.
Now, we say they don't really have much of an identity, but the running game has gotten kicked into gear. For the last 5 games, they've had 250-plus rushing. They've, a big commitment to that, 40-plus carries in, those 4 games. So they're starting to find a little bit of an edge on the ground, but it's really just being carried by Tank Bigsby and Jarquez Hunter. Bigsby, 907 and 10 touchdowns. Hunter, 541 yards and 7 touchdowns. Going on the road now with just an offense that can't throw the ball. If they're down late in this one, it's going to be a disaster. But I think if they're ahead in this game and they're running the ball with some toughness like Bigsby's shown the ability to do, I think they might have a good shot at this game because, Alabama's been very inconsistent themselves all year long. That's going to be their best shot, though, Nick, to get a lead early and run the ball and hold on to it. But, how do you feel about those chances on Saturday,
Certainly that is the key. We saw that last year in the game at Auburn. They jumped on a lead early, were able to keep the Tide offense in check. That's what you're going to have to do if you're Auburn. You're going to have to get points early in the game, keep Alabama in check, kind of deflate that crowd at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Even though Alabama's season has not gone the way that many Alabama fans, myself included, had hoped it would, missing out on the playoffs most likely. I know there's some weird percentage chance on ESPN. I don't believe any of that. We're not making the playoffs this year. That's simply the case. But if you want to beat Alabama in the Iron Bowl, you want to play up for this, you got to silence that crowd. About 100,000 fans will be there on Saturday. You need to quiet this crowd, shut the crowd up, and make sure that you're able to produce on the ground. Pick up big gains on first and second down, especially first down. You get 6-7 yards per carry on first down with Bigsby or Hunter. You're going to have a great recipe for success.
Now looking at that Alabama offense, 40 points per game. Only had 317 yards of offense against Ole Miss. This has been a unit that's, they've been battle-tested, resilient, put up 31 in a one-point loss to LSU, 49 at Tennessee. Bryce Young having a pretty respectable year. He's really had to carry this team of his, he's very resilient, really, himself. That's a big reason why this football team is in the position they're at. 64% completion rate, 2,600 yards for him, only 4 picks to 24 touchdowns. Certainly not having the Heisman-like season he had last year, but he is certainly still the heart and soul of this football team. As is Jahmyr Gibbs, 774 yards and 6 touchdowns on the ground. He's also one of their leading pass catchers, 40 receptions. That is a team high for 370 yards. Another 3 scores. The offensive line's improved. The running game obviously has some nice weapons in Gibbs and McClellan. But the offense, Nick, even though they're putting up 40 points per game, it just doesn't feel that way. The lack of outside speed and playmaking at wide receiver has been a big problem for them this year. It was the same way against Texas. It was the same way against LSU, where big plays were hard to find, numerous 3-and-outs, just an ugly performance overall. They're Alabama, so they fight and they find a way to get the job done. But for the most part, it's been a struggle bus effort for this receiving group. Jermaine Burton, 34 grabs, a little north of 500 yards. Him and Ja'Cory Brooks both have 6 touchdowns. Brooks leads the team with 547 yards. Cam Latu, 24 for 305. Treshawn Holden, Kobe Pertise. This is a deep and versatile group of pass catchers. I think long-term they're going to really explode and be great, but they're nowhere near where they were last year, and that's a big reason why this team has, not been able to just dominate opponents, even against Ole Miss, where they went on the road. They were just not good. They struggled, like I said, a little bit over 300 yards. What's the problem with Alabama this year, Nick? I think it's really all about that lack of playmaking at pass catcher, but is it more than that?
It certainly is weird that this Alabama offense is putting up 40 points per game. It doesn't feel like that. It's certainly being padded a little bit by some of the blowouts early in the season. This pass catching core, we expected a whole lot out of them. Jermaine Burton, he has 500 yards receiving this year plus 6 scores, but I think a lot of folks expected way more out of him. And I look at a guy like Tyler Harrell, right? Comes over from Louisville, an absolute speedster. We really expected high things out of him. I know he's been battling a few injuries, but he only has 2 grabs for 18 yards this season. Not having Harrell as a weapon available to Bryce Young is seriously impacts his offense. We saw it last year with Jameson Williams. He was able to burst down, get wide open, beat people with his speed. That's something that Tyler Harrell would have been able to do, and he's not been able to do that so far this season. Whether or not it's injury, lack of play time, whatever it is, and missing that weapon, I think, is really severely hurting Alabama. I'm happy with the way that they look on the ground, right? Jahmyr Gibbs, Chase McClellan have been having a solid season. McClellan certainly impressed me over the last few weeks. He got a ton of touches on Saturday. Gibbs did not dress against the FCS opponent. McClellan had over 100 yards on that day. He's got 5 touchdowns on the season. Bryce Young, he is still the wizard that we thought he was. Not going to be anywhere close to winning the Heisman this year, but still a very respectable season for him. 24 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, plus the 63.8% completion percentage. Sometimes some of those plays we saw in the Texas game, saw it in the LSU game, some of those plays where he just escapes pressure and somehow completes a pass. It's just mind-boggling to watch. I've liked the progression of Ja'Cory Brooks so far this season, leading team in receiving yards and the 6 scores for him. Very happy with that. Treshawn Holden, a guy that I did not expect a whole lot about this season, but he's got 5 scores, 300 yards receiving. Very impressed with that. JoJo Earl's another underrated guy on this offense. 155 yards received for him and 2 touchdowns. It's a deep pass-catching group. I think they'll be back next year and certainly be strong next year, but figuring out who's going to be throwing the quarterback next year is certainly something we have to look at. Maybe the bowl game potentially if Bryce Young opts out. So offense, it hasn't been bad per se. They've been putting up a lot of points, and even in the 2 losses they put up, like we said, they put up a ton of points in the 2 losses. 49 on the road at Tennessee, 31 at LSU. So I don't think the offense is the issue at times. I think the play calling is certainly questionable by Bill O'Brien. But in general, I haven't been totally disappointed with this offense. I just think the guys that need to step up, make plays, just have not been stepping up, making those plays.
Looking at the Auburn defense, this is a unit that's been really good against the run the last 3 weeks. That's not been the tune all year long. Gave up 448 to Ole Miss. 276 to Arkansas before that. Alabama's going to possess that same threat here. But one thing Auburn had going for them early on in the year, and they still do, is this phenomenal defensive line. Colby Wooden, 11.5 TFL. Derek Hall, another 11 tackles for loss. This is a team last year that completely teed off on Alabama. As a team, they had 11 tackles for loss in the Iron Bowl a season ago. Hall and Wooden, guys have combined for 13 sacks. After that, there's not much of a path for them. You look at Owen Papoy, a big-time leader, hard hitter in the middle, 83 tackles. He leads. Cam Riley stepped up with 54. That's going to be their best chance here. This is a team that held Alabama in check last year despite having all that speed. That was the worst offensive performance all of last season by the Alabama Crimson Tide offense. And obviously the Auburn defense has taken a big step back, but they certainly have a lot of great individual playmakers that can really turn this game around. One of them being DJ James out at corner. he's had a phenomenal year, Nick, out in coverage, and there's not a lot of speed that's really going to concern you if you're out there on the edge for Auburn. So I do think this is a good opportunity for this defense, especially if they can take an early lead and run the ball like we were saying. I feel like this defense is going to play a lot better than people think in this game. Jalen Simpson's going to be leaned on. He's a heck of a tackler as well. But I think it's going to start with Wooden and Derek Hall. And, depending on how those guys play, I think they might give Alabama some problems up front. And, that's going to make things a lot harder. And that will be making this game a lot closer as well.
I think Hall and Wooden certainly have some noise to make on Saturday. The 12 and a half sacks between the two of them. Love the numbers these guys have put up, and Owen Papel up there at the top, 82 total tackles on the season plus 2.5 sacks. Leading the way by a serious margin, about 25 tackles. He leads over Derek Hall. Been that lifeline on defense. The hard hitting linebacker that they needed. 43 solo tackles. Super impressed by him so ffar this season. I like a guy like Jalen Simpson at cornerback as well. DJ James. These guys are having solid seasons. The secondary's not been bad this year at all for Auburn. It's really not been terrible. The run defense also has been fantastic. Cam Riley's another linebacker is having a great season. 52 total tackles for him. Plus Steiner as well. He's got 45 tackles. So overall, this defense has not been bad. And the key, they're going to have to stop the run against Alabama. They're going to have to make Alabama uncomfortable, force them into throwing positions they don't want to be in if they want to beat Alabama on Saturday.
Naheem Pritchard on the other side's had a very good season as well. So I think this is going to be a good opportunity for Auburn to kind of impress and shock some people. They're 12th in college football with 6.1 yards per attempt allowed. That's a pretty outstanding number. Pretty underrated secondary, I would say, in college football for Auburn. Now you look at an Alabama defense. It's kind of been up and down for the most part. 17 points per game allowed. Of course, they had big-time problems with that, versatility of Tennessee. DeMarco Hellum specifically, I think he's bounced back pretty nicely since that game. As has the whole Alabama defense. They gave up 403 to Ole Miss. They gave 191 on the ground. Jaden Daniels' legs really beat them against LSU. This defense has, again, been up and down. They've had their bright spots. They've had their down moments. It seems like the down moments, though, really seem to cost them. And they really hurt this team. But this is still a run defense that I think is very exceptional. And it's not going to be hard for Alabama to load up the box here, I think, facing this passing attack. This is just a match made in heaven. That's why it's going to be so hard for Auburn to score points. Henry Teoto, of course, he's the leader in the middle for them. Will Anderson, just phenomenal off the edge. Guys like DJ Dale, Jaheim Otis. It's a big, nasty, veteran-filled interior defensive line. Byron Young's also there. Chris Braswell's been good off the edge. And, of course, Dallas Turner showcases plenty of speed. I think this is going to be a big day, not in terms of sacks, but I think tackles for loss. You're really going to see this Alabama front seven tee off on Auburn, Nick.
I certainly think the Alabama front seven can have a great day. I mean, look at a guy like Will Anderson and Dallas Turner. Both these guys having solid seasons. Anderson, 46 total tackles plus the 8 sacks for him. Dallas Turner, he's got the 35 total tackles plus the 4 sacks. He continuing to come into his own and grow as a player. I expect a huge year out of him next year. For me, it's interesting that DeMarco Hellums, leads the team in tackles with 89. It disappointed me a lot at Tennessee. Got totally beat a few times. A player that I've really had a hit or miss feeling for during his time at Alabama. But the 89 total tackles is certainly impressive. He's got 1 sack plus interception and 6 pass breakups. Brian Branch is another guy that's really impressed me this year. 70 total tackles for him, 2 sacks plus the 7 pass breakups, interception. Branch has really kind of stepped up for me and been a bit of a leader on this defense. Henry Toto, to expect him every single week. 81 total tackles plus the 2 sacks. I spoke to him after the game last Saturday in the press room. He said, "This is a rivalry game. I care about this. I want to win this game. This game means something to me." Big play out of him. I expect a lot of him on Saturday. Terrion Arnold's another guy I look at, young guy, getting experience. He's got 45 tackles so far this year, growing as a player out there in DB. I like this defense. They haven't totally disappointed me. I think, when you play an offense like Tennessee, they expect them to score a lot of points. Yes, there were some mistakes there, but that type of offense, that style they have, you expect Tennessee to put up a ton of points. This defense is not a typical Nick Saban defense. It hasn't really been like that for the last couple of years in Tuscaloosa, but I think this defense is very respectable, and they'll have a good day on Saturday against Auburn, who really just don't have a pulse on offense.
I think there's going to be a lot of one-on-one coverage, and that's going to be an opportunity for Auburn to attack downfield. Brian Branch, though, he's been a phenomenal defender, especially against the run. That's another guy they're just going to put in the box. And I think it's just going to be a big headache for Auburn. That's going to lead us to our final thoughts in the prediction. Pretty much what I just alluded to. I think Alabama's going to load up the box. It's going to be a big key for them. So I think Auburn, take the shot. They're going to play a lot of man coverage. They're going to be putting those corners on islands. Take the opportunities they're going to be given to you. It's going to be a hard day to run the ball because I really think that's going to be a stacked box. And for Alabama, don't get beat up front like you were a season ago. Obviously Auburn, the defense hasn't been great for the most part of this season, but that's still a very nasty defensive line that can really take this game over. Kind of like last year, people were underrating Auburn coming into that game. They didn't think it'd be close, and that D-line set the tone. And it was a headache all day long for 4+ quarters, all the way in the overtime. The defensive line was giving them problems, and they still have that potential here on Saturday. I think Alabama's going to win a closer game than people expect. I'm going to go 35-13. I think this defense is going to play very well, and I think Alabama's going to play very good also. But I think they're obviously going to score their points. They're going to win comfortably, but I do think they'll cover that 22.5-point line. I think this will be a much closer game than people anticipate, Nick. I know you have no prediction on this one, but what are your thoughts? Are you leaning towards a closer game or maybe more of a 30-40-point just complete beatdown?
I would certainly love to see a beatdown, but I think it's completely possible that Auburn keeps this close. This Alabama team has been hit or miss all season, and they certainly have the opportunity to let down. I certainly feel a lot better considering this game is in Tuscaloosa. If this game was in Auburn, I'd be very worried right now. The alarm bells would be ringing in my head. The two games in Auburn in my time as a student, Auburn won in 2019 and should have won in 2021 if Tank hadn't fallen out of bounds. That could have been a totally different story last year. I feel a lot more confident considering, in 2020, this team, Alabama won by a handful, put up 42 points, only gave up 13 to Auburn. It was a ranked Auburn team at the time, so certainly a solid, respectable team. I think Alabama has a good chance to put up a ton of points on Saturday. I think the key, like you said, is to load the box, stonewall the run, and force Auburn to throw the ball and make them make mistakes. A couple turnovers certainly possible in the secondary on Saturday for Alabama. I like to put up a ton of points on Saturday, but it's possible to be close for the first half. I think Alabama will pull away in the second half, though, and make this a bit more lopsided, but certainly at halftime, this game could be close.
Should be a pretty good game. Always pretty intense to see these two square off regardless of what is on the line. It's going to be it for today's episode. As always, Nick, I appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a very important rivalry to me. It means a whole lot to me. Been a crazy rivalry the last 10 years. A couple of wins that Auburn really needed. Got themselves to BCS National Championship plus the SEC title game in 2017. Great rivalry. A lot of hate for these two schools. Should be a lot of fun to attend my first one in person on Saturday.
It's going to be it for today's episode, guys. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.